Can you hear? Can everybody hear?
Yep. Yes.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming. It's been a tremendous thing to see so many people come into the walking tour, so I appreciate that. And as I say every time before we start, I want you to be careful as we walk around the cemetery, because the ground is so uneven and a lot of these headstones are so small that you could easily trip over them. So please watch your step as we turn around to go to another site. And also I want to thank Sarah Hendrickson from the E.D. Locke Public Library for helping us with the walking tours and the logistics. And so, as you all probably know, the theme for this walking tour is musicians and writers or journalists. And I think we're going to have some fun on this tour with some audio as well as me speaking. But there's some very interesting stories on this tour. And we're going to start right here with Ron Larson. No relation to me, but he was the son of Julia and John Larson of the Larson House fame and of Larson Beach. Donald was born in 1907, and so he was 4 years old when the family moved into the Larson House, and so that's pretty much where he grew up. And the Larson family was very musical, and they even had a grand piano in their living room. And Donald was really the musical one in the family, and so he would play a lot for family gatherings, and he learned to play the piano very well. And so he left McFarland and he went to Luther College, spent some time at the University of Wisconsin, and he got his master's in music from Temple University in Philadelphia. And then he went on to be on the faculty of the Wisconsin School of Music. That wasn't tied to the University of Wisconsin. It was an independent school where kids from around the area could go to Madison, take lessons on an instrument or vocal lessons. And so Donald was one of the teachers at that, probably on the piano. He was an organist for a number of years at the First Unitarian Church in Madison, and then Luther Memorial Church in Madison. At Luther Memorial, he was the organist from 1928 to 1937. So that's a pretty big church, a pretty impressive organ they have there. So it was a great job for his being an organist there. So he was an organist at Luther Memorial Church in Madison. But from there, he was added to the faculty at Luther College. And he was there beginning in 1937. And he was the head of the music department at Luther during the World War II years. And if you know anything about Luther College, you know it was a very strong musical school. It had a strong tradition going way back into the start of the school, as their musical department was very strong. But unfortunately, in 1948, he died at the age of 41 from a heart attack. And funeral services were held at Luther College, and then also at the Lutheran Church in Decorah, where he was an organist while he was on the Luther faculty. And then he was brought back to McFarland, where there was a third funeral and then the burial. But he was a very well-respected musician from McFarland, and made a great impact on a lot of students' lives. Now we're going to just wander a short distance that way. All right. Well, our next musician is Torbjorn Vik, and he was born in 1841 in Norway, and he was very involved in music while he was in Norway. He was a school teacher where he would lead the music, the singing, and he was in their church where he was a hymn leader, and he would conduct the congregation in singing. But he married Birgit Vick, who was quite a bit older than Torbjorn. Birgit had a number of children, and so the same year that they were married in 1862, they immigrated to this area of Wisconsin. And while they're here, they had several more children together. And so Torbjorn was quite the amazing musician while he was in Norway, and then he brought that tradition here, but he was a Slomodican player. And the Slomodican is a one-stringed instrument that's a long box with the one string across, and you play it with a bow. And he would play that in the church instead of having an organ, because the smaller rural churches didn't have organs and probably didn't have a piano. So the Slomodican was the way the song or hymn leader could lead the congregation in singing. And so he would be playing the Slomodican, and he'd also use it when he would go to the school and lead the children in singing, and quite often they'd be singing hymns in school. But he developed this idea of creating 4 Slomodicans that would be playing at once, and it was said that he is the first person in the world to have devised this type of idea, 4-part harmony with Slomodicans, and he would make them slightly different sizes, so you'd have a soprano, alto, tenor, and bass Slomodican, and he took the strings off of a cello and he would place them on the 4 Slomodicans, so you'd have the 4-part harmony. And so he brought that tradition with him to America when he immigrated, and he kept that going in this area. And so we don't know, but I have a feeling that the Slomodicans were probably playing right here where we're gathered, because the first 2 churches of the Lutheran, McFarland Lutheran Church, were in the middle of the cemetery here. And so you can have an idea that Thorbjorn Vik was here playing the Slomodican, and if not just one, but maybe more than one, if his family would play with him. And so Torbjorn was quite important in terms of bringing that tradition of the Slomodican to the United States. And I'll just explain the Slomodican a little bit, but as I said, it's just a flat kind of box, rectangular box, and the music is written in figures from 1 to 7, kind of like on the A through G, and the C scale numbers are written or etched on top of the Slomodican. But if he wants a different key, there are lathes that would represent maybe the key of D or the key of F, and you'd lay that on top of the key of C lathe. And the lathe in Norwegian was called a lineal, and it was said that quite often the teacher with the Slomodican would use the lineal as a discipline tool. It was very handy to whack somebody with it. But Thorbjorn was mostly a farmer. That was his occupation, but he played the music on the side. But he just loved music. And in his obituary that ran in the Stoughton Courier Hub on December 17th, 1915, it said, "He was intensely fond of music, and although principally engaged in farming, he did considerable teaching of vocal music. He was best known as a choir leader, and for nearly 40 years had officiated as director of one or another of the choirs of the Norwegian Lutheran churches in Stoughton and nearby congregations. His last work in such capacity he performed at the recent Reformation celebration held by the 3 Lutheran churches in Stoughton on October 31st, 1915. On that occasion, he remarked that it probably was the last time that he would direct any choir, and his words came true." Unfortunately, a short time after that, on his farm, he fell off a stack of corn stalks and injured himself quite a bit, and as he was recuperating from those injuries, he developed pneumonia, and it was quite severe. But his wife was there, who was much older, but she got sick as well with pneumonia, and so they're both near death, and they both died in 1915, and both just a few days apart. Torbjorn died first, and then Brigitte died so soon afterwards that they had a double funeral in Stoughton. For when they first came here, they were living closer to McFarland, but later on in life they moved to another farm closer to Stoughton. But the funeral service was in Stoughton, and then they brought the bodies here for burial. And the people attending the funeral, according to the obituary in the paper, caught the 3:48 train from Stoughton to McFarland so they could be here for the burial. And so, as I said, Thorbjorn Vik was very important about the Slomodican, and now we're going to find out how important it was. And we'll go over just a short walk over here. Yes?
Ron, can you spell that Slomodican?
It's like, she asked if I could spell Slomodican, and it starts out with the word Psalm, like the book of Psalm, and then Odikon, Slomodican.
Thank you.
Yep. And now we're going to talk about Elsie Thompson. And Elsie was one of the daughters of Thorbjorn Vik. And so Elsie grew up on the farm, doing a lot of farm work, but also learning how to play the Slomodican. And she was probably one that would play with her father in church or at home. But she took that idea of the four-part harmony with Slomodicans, and she carried that with her through her life. But Elsie got married to Steinar Thompson, and they had a farm that stretched from where like Tottle Inn Nursery is today towards Lake Wabisa. They had about 91 acres, and so that was enough to keep her busy, but they also had 13 children. And so I don't think Elsie had a whole lot of time to play the Slomodican during those years. And so Stenner and Elsie retired from the farm and then moved to town. They lived in a house on Main Street. And then Stenner died in 1929. And Elsie, wasn't that old. She was in her mid to late 60s. And instead of, thinking, okay, that's it, I'll just sit in my rocking chair and watch the traffic go by on Main Street, she resurrected the idea of the Slomodican, and she recruited two of her daughters and a niece to play with her in that four-part harmony. And they practiced and they played, and they got really quite good. They had a strong reputation in this area with their Slomodican playing. And so she had two daughters, as I said, Nora Brixson and Charlotte Sullivan, and a niece, Bertha Larson. And it's interesting, the Bertha Larson is the sister to Donald Larson that we spoke about earlier. And everybody here is related. The Thompsons, of course, related to the Vicks, and the Vicks are related to the Larsons, so it's all one big family in a way. But so Elsie revived her father's idea in bringing the four Slomodicans together, and using the same concept with the cello strings and whatnot. And they just didn't have the four Slomodicans. When Elsie passed away, I think she had in her collection 30-some Slomodicans in her possession. And so it became even more of a family project. Homer Vik was a nephew of Elsie's, and he was pretty good with some carpentry stuff, so he made several improvements to the instrument, including a method of tuning the instrument, and he also made wooden cases to carry the Slomodikins. So you could put two Slomodikins in one case, and then he developed an idea where you'd have detachable legs that could be taken off of the Slomodikin and put into the carrying case, so you could take it wherever you'd want, take the legs out, attach it to the Slomodikin, and it would be a stand. You wouldn't need a table to put the Slomodikin on. And so he helped with that, and they started performing all over southern Wisconsin, and they had quite the reputation. And they played at the National Folklore Festival in Washington, D.C. in 1938 and 1941, and at Chicago in 1937. And they played again in Chicago at the Century of Progress event. And so they kept being re-invited because they were so popular. And before the 1941 trip, Elsie was interviewed by Ivor Culness, who we'll hear about in a couple minutes, of the Capital Times, and it was noted that they would be driving in her daughter Nora's car to Washington, D.C. And she said, the girls suggested that we go to hotels this time on account of my age, which was nearly 78. But I told them I can take it as well as anyone in the group, and we will buy groceries, do our own cooking, and sleep in tourist cabins. So that's how they got to Washington. It took them 4 days to drive out there. But they also performed in parades, Norwegian festivals, churches, the Wisconsin State Fair, and they performed in Decorah in 1944 at Luther College's homecoming festivities. And Ron Larson, her nephew, was the head of the music department there, and so he arranged this performance, and it went over quite well. But and they all the performers wore their Norwegian national costumes, or bunads, and they also had some singers and dancers in the performance as well. And but we're going to hear a little of the Slomodikins, number 3.
Idris Mordnorden.
All right, thank you. So that's Elsie Thompson and her group. That was a recording that was made back in the 1940s.
Yes. Would there be one of those instruments in the museum?
Yeah, the question was, is there a Slomodikin in the museum? Yes, there are 2 of them on display in the Norwegian corner of the museum. But so you heard that. It sounded like a old pump organ, but then you have to wonder if hopefully they had a little more lively tune. That could put people to sleep. But anyway, you get an idea of how it sounded and how they would get the 4 parts playing. And here's a picture of Elsie, who's on the right, with her 2 daughters and a niece, with their Slomodikins.
Should be on the left.
So they continued playing for quite a while. So that was all started because of Thorbjorn Vik, her father, who brought the tradition and the idea of 4-part harmony Slomodikins to the United States. Now we're going to head back in this corner. All right, we're going to move on from musicians to a writer. and that's Dorothy Helmke, who was a lifelong resident of McFarland. She was born in a log cabin just east of town, and her parents were immigrants from Norway. And after a while from farming out there, they bought a house on Main Street that the family still owns. And Dorothy's brother Helmer was killed in World War I, but we're going to be talking more about him in September on the walking tour, September 24th, on veterans. Dorothy married Chester Helmke in 1921, and he was in World War I as well, and he was affected by the mustard gas and just wasn't quite right, and the marriage didn't work out, so they were divorced in 1934. And so Dorothy was pretty much a single mother. She had 4 daughters. But she was very artistic. She was a painter and a drawer, but she also was a writer. And so she started writing for the local papers. And at that time, it was the Capital Times and the Stoughton Courier Hub. And then later, in 1966, she continued writing when the McFarland Community Life first was published. And she did that up until the 1970s. She always credited Ivar Culness for starting her writing for the local newspapers. But besides writing, Dorothy also worked for the McFarland Post Office, the McFarland Telephone Company, and she was involved in teaching at Sunday school, and she played the piano for singing in the McFarland primary schools, and she was involved with the Red Cross for about 50 years. And she was elected the Justice of the Peace in McFarland in 1942. But a lot of her newspaper columns for the McFarland Community Life were gathered by her daughters and put into a little booklet that's on sale at the McFarland Historical Society. They're called Village Memories. But one time in 1942, I guess the Capital Times was asking readers to write a poem, and I guess it was, and World War II was going on, so that I guess they wanted poetry to come into the paper so they could be published and make the readers feel better by reading these poems. And Dorothy Helmke wrote a poem that was published in the Capital Times on November 14th, 1942. And so I'm just going to read her short poem. It's at close of day, as the golden sun sinks into the west and night comes creeping o'er us. How many good deeds have we done to the people near us? Have we given a friendly smile and made some sad heart gayer? And have we through a kindly glance scattered some sunshine as we went? Then we can call the day well spent. Have we remembered to say hello to some good friend of long ago? Or are we too busy with just ourselves to want to be kind? Then keep this in mind, that wherever good we left undone is what gave us that heartache at sunset time. This day is ours, let all we meet speak better of us. May we be richer by a friend, some good deed done. So at eventide we can repeat, dear God, thank you for the day that's gone. Thank you for the day that's gone. Bless the day that is to come. Dorothy Helmke. And so I mentioned that Ivar Culness, wrote an article about the Solodican quartet and how the Helmke family thought that he was responsible for getting Dorothy Helmke's writing going. But I'll talk a little bit about Ivar Culness now. He's not buried here, but he's in the Upper Cemetery, and he was born in Pope County, Minnesota, which is west central Minnesota, and he grew up on a farm. But his parents sent him to Luther College, where he went to study and graduated there in 1907. But upon graduation, he went back home, which was Pope County, but a little town there called Starbuck, and he bought the local paper. And he started his newspaper career that started in 1907 and lasted until 1948. But over the years, the first 20 years, he was here and there in Minnesota. He would buy little papers and be the editor, publisher. And the last place he was in Minnesota was Red Wing, and writing for the Organized Farmer, like a labor paper in Red Wing. But for some reason he got the idea that he should come to Wisconsin, and in 1927 he moved his family to Stoughton, where he started writing for the Stoughton Courier Hub. And but he didn't last long there, because then the Capital Times called him William Evu, and William Evu was a strong Norwegian, and Ivar Culness was as well, so they had a lot in common. So Evu asked Culness to be on his staff, but that only lasted for a few years, and then Ivar switched to the Wisconsin State Journal and wrote for them as well for about 4 or 5 years. He wrote the farm news, and he was also a columnist for both of those papers. But then he left the State Journal to start up a paper on his own in Madison called Lutherland News, and it was a paper for all the Lutheran churches in the region. And that was around 1936, 1937, and it wasn't a smart time for anybody to start a business because of the Depression. So it only lasted 2 or 3 years. But then Evu took him back at the Capital Times, and that's where Ivar Culness finished his writing career when he retired in 1948. And you can learn more about Ivar Culness by watching a video on McFarland Cable's YouTube channel. It's the Leif Erikson Movement and Ivar Culness. And I did that video maybe 3 years ago. But I don't need many notes to read about Ivar Culness, because he's my grandfather. But we'll go up a little ways now.
So interesting.
All right, well, the next person is Ralph Brandt. He was the minister at the McFarland Lutheran Church. And he arrived here in 1900 and was McFarland's first full-time minister. Up until that time, we shared a minister with Stoughton and West Koshkonong. But Pastor Brandt was born 11 miles east of Watertown, Wisconsin, in a parsonage. His father was a pioneer minister among the early Norwegian settlers. But Pastor Brandt graduated from from Luther College in Decorah, Iowa in 1877. And he was ordained a minister in 1883. But between those years, he stayed a lot of time in Decorah, even though he had graduated. And he was one of the students or former students who started the Luther College concert band. And so that was 1878. And some of us like to say it's the world famous Luther College concert band, because a few of us have played in it. But anyway, it is well known. It was really well known back in the day, especially in the 1920s, 1930s. And the story is that the Luther College Concert Band would go on tours around the Midwest or out to the Northwest, and John Philip Sousa's band would also be on tour, and they would go in the same places, and the Luther College Concert Band always outdrew the Sousa band. That's the story anyway. But so Pastor Brandt was responsible for starting that concert band at Luther College. And so his first call as a minister was in South Dakota, and it was such a tiny place it didn't have a name, so they named it after Pastor Brandt. It's Brandt, South Dakota. But he had 17 congregations that he was responsible for in this big area. So he didn't get there get to each church very often, and so he was concerned about not seeing his parishioners very often. So he created a newsletter or a little newspaper that he published in his home, and he would mimeograph it and send it out to all the congregations. And so not only was he a musician, he was also a writer. And that was the start of his journalistic career, because when he was in McFarland, he would also write for the local papers. He was, fluent in Norwegian, so he would write for the Scandinavian, which is a Norwegian American newspaper, the Minneapolis Tidende, and the Decorah Posten, which is a very famous Norwegian American newspaper. And he would write for English language papers in the Midwest, the Minneapolis Tribune, the Chicago Tribune, St. Paul Pioneer Press, and the Capital Times and the State Journal. And so this was a kind of an interesting combination. He saw himself as this journalist, but also a musician. And then when he came to McFarland, he had he knew how to start bands because of the Luther College Concert Band, and so he started a community band in McFarland, and he was the director of the first McFarland community band. And so that community band had 22 members. And one interesting side note about Pastor Brandt, his grandfather was Pastor Jacob Ottesen, who founded the McFarland Lutheran Church. And another interesting thing is that my grandfather, Ivor Culness, wrote Pastor Brandt's obituary for the Stoughton Courier Hub. All right, now we'll continue all the way back. It's hard for you to see with the sun, but there's a lot of writing on this headstone. And this is for Bjorn Stondal, of course another Norwegian. But he was a farmer, and he had a favorite Norwegian hymn. And he just liked this one verse of it, that he would etch it on wherever he could on his farm, on the side of a shed, on fence posts, on gates and whatnot. He would etch this verse, and so he put it in his will that he wanted this verse etched on his headstone. But that would cost a lot of money. But the family finally did it, and it's a hymn called "God's Word is Our Great Heritage," and it was written in 1817 by a Danish Lutheran pastor, Nikolai Grundtvig, and it was written on the 300th anniversary of the Reformation, and he wrote the hymn as the 5th verse of Martin Luther's "A Mighty Fortress is Our God." And so I thought, well, that's interesting, so I Googled the hymn "God's Word is Our Great Heritage," and I didn't get a mighty fortress. Instead, I got a different tune, and so now we'll play that number 1. So that's a nice tune, but it wasn't what Bjorn Stondal heard, because that tune was written in 1916, 10 years after Bjorn died. So, and so then I was looking further, and I found "God's Word is Our Great Heritage" in the hymnal that the Lutheran Church uses, and it's to the tune of "A Mighty Fortress," and that's number 2. So that's a mighty fortress. And so this Danish pastor, Grundtvig, wanted that to be the fifth verse of a mighty fortress, but it wasn't. But it stands alone as its separate hymn in the hymn book. It has that tune written by Martin Luther, and then it has this verse that Bjorn Stendal enjoyed, written by Nikolai Grundtvig. And so it's in the Lutheran Book of Worship on page 239, and it's only that one verse that's in that hymn, and it's etched here, etched in Norwegian, of course. That's what Bjorn understood. But another interesting connection between all of this is that Bjorn's granddaughter, Elsie Torgerson, married Walter Brandt, who is the son of Pastor Rolf Brandt. And Elsie told this story about the verse to Dorothy Helmke. And so that's how I got to know about it, because of Elsie, the granddaughter, who's the daughter-in-law to Pastor Brandt, who talked to Dorothy Helmke. So there are a lot of connections. All right, now we'll just stay here. I'm going to talk about another journalist who's not buried here, but he's buried in the Upper Cemetery. Erwin Knoll, and some of you might know that name, but he was born in Austria in 1931 into a Jewish family, and in 1931, in the 1930s, he fled Austria with his family from the Nazis, and they came to New York, where Erwin Knoll would always say he was a refugee, but he went from not knowing a word of English to mastering it. And he became an American citizen in 1946. And he was a staunch advocate of nonviolence and free speech and the First Amendment. And so in 1957, he joined the staff of the Washington Post as a reporter and assistant world editor. And from 1963 to 1968, he covered the White House for the Newhouse National News Service. And in 1968, he joined the Progressive magazine, which is published in Madison, as its Washington editor. And then in 1973, he moved to Madison as the magazine's head editor. And he always took pride that he was on President Nixon's official enemies list. And it was written on a piece of paper that they have, that he was on that list. And it's amazing. He was a regular guest on PBS's McNeil and Lair NewsHour, and he was probably, a very, very recognizable face back in the 70s and 80s as a progressive voice. And in 1979, he led the legal battle with the against the U.S. Justice Department, where the federal government was suing the Progressive magazine, trying to block them from publishing an article on designing a hydrogen bomb. But it never really was published because another publication published it first. And so it was a moot point with the Progressive magazine. But one quote that's attributed to Erwin Knoll is he said that everything you read in the newspapers is absolutely true, except for that rare story of which you happen to have firsthand knowledge. And that's so true. And Erwin, in a 1985 interview, elaborated, "One of the joys of editing the Progressive," he said, "is that we feel it is part of our job to offend readers. We're not here to stroke them, but to provoke them. It's a poor issue of the Progressive that doesn't make a chunk of its readership angry." So I find it interesting that he ended up in McFarland. He moved here, I think, in the late 70s, early 80s, and he lived in the old Johnson farmhouse on the corner of Johnson Street and Dennis Drive, and that's where I met him once in 1986, where we had just published the McFarland walking tour booklet, and I was passing them out to the owners of the historic properties. And I went to his house, and his wife answered, and I gave her the booklet, and then I just kept going, and he caught up to me, and he was very appreciative of receiving that booklet, and he was a very kind and soft-spoken person that you wouldn't think of he was an aggressive progressive, but he was. I wish I would have talked to him more. He was an interesting person. So very fascinating that Irwin Knoll is buried in the McFarland Cemetery, the Upper Cemetery. All right, now we'll head over this way. All right, now the next person is another musician, Henry Everson. His parents, Knut and Martha, immigrated from Norway, from the Sogna area, and music was an important thing in their family as well. Henry's brother Sam played the fiddle, while his sister Rose sang and played the organ. But it was Henry's fiddle playing that really became widely known in the McFarland area. But as a kid, he made his first violin when he was 8 years old out of a cigar box, and this old strings taken out of a old screen door. But by the time he was 12, he bought his first real violin. And he started his own band and started performing at house parties and dances in the area. And now this is around the turn of the century, 1900 to 1920, he would be doing this a lot. And parties were a common thing among the Norwegian immigrants and their descendants. They would have parties in farmhouses or barns or schoolhouses, wherever they had a large space where they could dance. And if it was in the house, it was usually in the living room or the parlor, and they would take all the furniture out of the room and take it outside, and so they could have the whole room to dance. And so maybe 2 or 3 fiddlers would stand in the corner playing their tunes, and the players would pride themselves by playing all night for hours and hours without repeating a tune, and that was a goal of all of the fiddlers. And in McFarland during the 1920s and 1930s, there was an old farmstead on Highway MN, which was a very popular gathering place for house parties. And fiddlers besides Henry Everson included Trace Natvig, Harris Hansen, Hans Larson, Benny Larson, Tallman Johnson, and Ray Alsmo. And there was a story of Henry that he told someone that Henry worked on the farm, and then he became a stonemason and a carpenter. So he had hard work with his hands, and physical labor all day long. But after doing that, he heard that there was a good party that night in Deerfield. So he and a couple of friends, this was like 1900 or maybe the late 1800s, there's no way to drive, there wasn't a car, and it was taking a horse. They didn't probably have access to a horse and buggy, so they walked. They walked to Deerfield, and there they partied all night, and they played the fiddles and they danced, and probably until 3 o'clock in the morning, and then they walked back to McFarland. And then the next morning, hopefully it was a Friday, that maybe he didn't work on Saturday, but in those days I bet he worked. But anyway, so Henry was a stonemason, so you can just imagine his hands and how calloused they were. And one house for sure that I know that he helped build was the house on Bashford Street, where Thelma Allen lives now, right behind the Larson house. And he played until his 70s, and he had a huge collection of fiddles, just like L.C. Thompson had a huge collection of Slomodikins. Henry Everson had just dozens of fiddles. One of them was just recently donated to the McFarland Historical Society by his great nephew, Mark Kopp. So that's another thing. It's in the same place. Henry Everson's fiddle is just below where the Slomodikins are located in the museum. And I'll just stay right here to talk about the next person, Milo Edwards. who was born in 1909 and died in 1993, but he's also buried in the Upper Cemetery. He was born in McFarland, but did a lot of things around here. He served as the director of the McFarland State Bank. He was on the McFarland School Board, the Town of Dunn Board, McFarland Cemetery Association. He was on the Church Council of McFarland Lutheran Church, and he was a founding member of the McFarland Historical Society. And he was the son of Gerhard and Lizzie Edwards, and the nephew of Theodore and E.N. Edwards, the hardware people. And he married Marvel Stolen in 1935. But Milo loved music, especially the old-time fiddle music played by Henry Everson and others. And so in the late 1940s and early 1950s, when the barn dances and the house parties were kind of disappearing, and the old-time fiddlers were disappearing as well, Milo decided to begin recording the remaining folk musicians in the area. And so he used this very interesting device to record the fiddlers. It was a magnetic wire recorder, and so it wasn't tape. It was actually a wire that would record the sound. And so he recorded the music of Henry Everson and the Hovland Brothers and the Oldsmo Ramblers and other fiddlers and musicians in the area. And the recordings were discovered in the early 1980s by the Wisconsin Old Time Music Project and were added to their collections. And so, thanks to Milo Edwards, the tradition of McFarland's Norwegian fiddle music can be played and enjoyed for generations to come. And Milo's daughter, Pat, is with us today. And I'm sorry, I forgot. I didn't give the cue, did I? No. Okay, so we're going to hear some music that of Henry Everson, music that Milo Edwards probably recorded. And here's Henry Everson. So that's Henry Everson playing the fiddle, and he's being accompanied by a guitarist in the background. But that, we can stop that one because that one goes on for 19 minutes. All right, now we're gonna head over this way. All right. Well, then, next one we're going to talk about is the Oldsmo family. The father was Ray, and the mother was Martha, and they were. Ray was very musical, and he would be one of the fiddlers out there at these house parties, playing with Henry Everson and others. And but he and Martha had a number of children, and they grew up, and as kids they were very musical, all of them. They all could play instruments, and they would play it as a family get-togethers, or if they had a family reunion, or just in the home they would play. And it was written that often when they would get together, the result sounded like a cross between a hoedown and a jam session, but they were just they loved to play. And they figured they had a good sound together, so they they formed the Oldsmo Ramblers, which is all of their, at least 6 of the children, and the father, Ray. And the mother, they say, was their #1 fan and just helped promote the family playing. And so that they started that in 1949 with their name, the Oldsmobile Ramblers. And their first big playing gig outside of the family events was in 1951, entertaining patients at the Wisconsin Neurological Foundation in Madison. And so for the next 15 years or so, the Oldsmobile Ramblers played at local hospitals, nursing homes, town halls, 4-H meetings, fairs, those types of things. But and they specialized in popular and Western tunes, waltzes, polkas, and square dances. And their father, Ray, died in 1960, but the Ramblers kept going for a few more years. And Ray is buried in the Upper Cemetery, but one of his sons, Norman, who was a part of the Oldsmobile Ramblers, is buried here. But you know, marriages and families and commitments kind of pulled them away, so the band didn't really go out and perform much after that, except for family events and for fun. And but some of the brothers continued to play into the 1980s and 90s. For different occasions associated with the Southern Wisconsin Old Time Fiddlers Association and the McFarland Spillman's Log. And but we also have two Oldsmobile family members here, Betty Kelhagen and Jim Ellisted. And so their mother, Margaret, was she was the second oldest, and so she didn't play as much with the Oldsmobile Ramblers, but she did play with them, right? She played organ and piano. So that's just another example of the musicians in the McFarland area. But I did mention the Southern Wisconsin Old Time Fiddlers Association and the McFarland Spillman's Log, and so that takes us to our last person we're going to talk about is Walter Landrud, but he's also buried in the Upper Cemetery, but he's the one who founded the Southern Wisconsin Old Time Fiddlers Association and the McFarland Spillman's Log. And so Walter was a member of the McFarland Historical Society board, and he came to the board one night and had this idea that we should sponsor a fiddle fest, and that's a Spillman's Log. Is a Norwegian word. Spille is play in Norwegian, and a log is kind of like a group or organization. So a Spillman's log, a group of fiddlers playing, and so the board said, sure, go ahead, and Walt did all the work to get that going. But it was a great success where a lot of fiddlers, including some of the Oldsmobiles, came to the first Spillman's Log. I think it was 1987 or around there, and it went on for about 4 or 5 years. But the Southern Wisconsin Old Time Fiddlers Association continued beyond that. But besides that, Walter also was a musician in a way. He sang in the McFarland Lutheran Church Choir. And I read that that's where he met his wife, Karen. Is that true? And he also sang in the Madison Grieg Chorus, so that's a pretty prestigious organization, choral organization in Madison. So Walt was involved in that, and I read that he took fiddle lessons in retirement, and he taught himself how to play the harmonica, and he would, if you met him anywhere, he probably had the harmonica in his pocket. But Walt, besides being farmer, he also operated the school bus company for the McFarland School District for many years. And we also have a son of Walter here, and David. So that officially ends the tour, unless you have some questions.
How long did the community band last here in McFarland? And did it stop?
The question was, how long did the community band perform in McFarland? So it was the early 1900s when it started, and it was off and on for a while. I think it went into the 30s and 40s maybe. I just remember my mom saying she played in it, and that would have been the late 30s or early 40s, but I don't know if it was continuous all the way. And then I think it ended. But then maybe in the late 1980s, it was started up again by Glenn Nielsen and Bill Garvey, and that's still going, I think, the McFarland Community Band.